Happy Wednesday. Okay, so our question today is wanna be Wednesday. So I haven't asked in a while, and so your answers may have changed since the beginning of the year, or you're new here and I haven't ever asked you. So what do you want to be when you grow up? I always wanted to be a teacher. I had a little change as I got older, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a paramedic and I'm gonna be a nurse. But I eventually came back to where I wanted to be when I was a little girl, and that was to be a teacher. So here I am, and I am a teacher now. If you know Jace, if you're in my class, you know who Jace is, or if you know me at all, you know who Jace is. And I asked him the same question this morning, and he is going to be Iron Man when he grows up. So watch out, world. Iron Man is coming. All right, so you can email me your answer there, or you can find me on Facebook, or if you're in my class, you can send it on Class Dojo and let me know what it is you want to be when you grow up. I can't wait to see. Okay, so we read chapters 1 through 5 yesterday, and they're pretty short chapters, so I'm going to be able to do 5 again today for our 20 minutes of reading time. So as we were reading yesterday, we know that this little mouse was born, and his name's Despereaux, and he has done things already in his short little life that normally mice don't do. He was born with his eyes open, and he was the only little mouse that was born alive out of that little bunch. I don't know how to describe a bunch of mice being born. Anyway, he was the only one that was born alive. And it was super, super tiny. Like, he had a super, super little tiny body, but he had these big old ears. And he was made fun of for it because his family was like, oh, you are so tiny, but you have these ginormous ears. And he doesn't do things that mice normally do. So his family is trying to teach him the proper way to be a mouse, and he doesn't do those things. So he doesn't want to eat the books because he wants to read them. And his family's trying to tell him to scurry away from people and stay out of the sight of people. But he hears this lovely music, and it sounds sweet as honey. And he ends up in Princess P's room, and that is where the king is playing her music. And his bigger brother sees Despereaux in the bedroom, and Princess P is touching the top of Despereaux's head. And that is just against the mice rules. You don't do that. And now Despereaux thinks he is in love, and he is in love with the Princess P. So I think we may hear some more on this today. Okay, so I'm going to read chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so here is chapter 6. And once again, I will show you the best I can pictures when I come across them. Okay, so chapter 6 is called This Drum. He simply cannot be my son, Lester said. He clutched his whiskers with his front paws and shook his head from side to side in despair. Of course he is your son, said Antoinette. What do you mean he is not your son? This is a ridiculous statement. Why must you always make the ridiculous statements? You, said Lester, this is your fault. The French blood in him has made him crazy. Sieste moi, said Antoinette, sieste moi. Why must it always be I who takes the blame? If your son is such a disappointment, it is much my fault as it is yours. Well, something must be done, said Lester, and he pulled on a whisker so hard it came loose. He waved the whisker over his head, and he pointed it at his wife. He will be the end of us all, he shouted, sitting at the foot of a human king. Unbelievable, unthinkable. Oh, so dramatic, said Antoinette. She held out one paw and studied her painted nails. He's a small mouse. How much harm can he do? Well, if there's one thing I've learned in this world, said Lester, it is that mice must act like mice, or else there is bound to be trouble. I will call a special meeting of the Mouse Council. Together we will decide what must be done. Oh, said Antoinette, you and this Council of the Mouse. It is a waste of time, in my opinion. Don't you understand? Shouted Lester. He must be punished. He must be brought up before the tribunal. He pushed past her and dug furiously through a pile of paper scraps until he uncovered a thimble with a piece of leather stretched across its open end. Oh, please, said Antoinette, and she covered her ears. Not the drum of the Council of the Mouse. Yes, said Lester, the drum. He held it high above his head, first to the north and then to the south and then to the east and the west. He lowered it and turned back to his wife and closed his eyes and took a deep breath and began to beat the drum slowly, one long beat with his tail, 2 staccato beats with his paws. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap. The rhythm of the drum was a signal for the members of the Mouse Council. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom. The beating of the drum let them know that an important decision would have to be made, one that affected the safety and the well-being of the entire mouse community. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom. Chapter 7, A Mouse in Love. And what was our own favorite member of the mouse community doing while the sound of the Mouse Council drum echoed through the walls of the castle? Well, reader, I must report that Furlough had not seen the worst of it. Despereaux sat with the princess and the king and listened to the song after song. And at one point, gently, oh so gently, the pea picked up the mouse in her hand. She cupped him in her palm and scratched his oversized ears. You've lovely ears, the pea said to him. They are like small pieces of velvet. Despereaux thought that he might faint with the pleasure of someone referring to his ears as small and lovely. He laid his tail against the pea's wrist to steady himself, and he felt the princess's pulse, the pounding of her heart, and his own heart immediately took the rhythm of hers. Papa, the pea said when the music was over, I'm going to keep this mouse. We are going to be great friends. The king looked at Despereaux, cupped in his daughter's hands. He narrowed his eyes. A mouse, he muttered. A rodent. What? Put it down, the king commanded. No, said the pea, who was a person not at all used to being told what to do. I mean, why should I? Because I told you to. But why? Protested the pea. Because it's a mouse. I know, I'm the one that told you it was a mouse. I wasn't thinking, said the king. Thinking of what? Your mother, the queen. My mother, said the pea sadly. Mice are rodents, said the king, and he adjusted his crown. They are related to rats. You know how we feel about rats. You know our own dark history with rats. The pea shuddered. But Papa, she said, he is not a rat. He is a mouse. There's a difference. Royalty, the king said, has many responsibilities, and one of them is not becoming involved personally with even the distant relatives of one's enemies. Put him down, pea. The princess put Despereaux down. Good girl, said the king, and then he looked at Despereaux. Scat, he said. Despereaux, however, did not scat. He sat up and stared at the princess. The king stamped his foot. Scat, he shouted. Papa, said the princess, please don't be mean to him. And she began to weep. Despereaux, seeing her tears, broke the last of the ancient rules of mice. He spoke to a human. Please, said Despereaux, don't cry. He held out his handkerchief to the princess. The pea sniffed and leaned down closer to him. Do not speak to her, thundered the king. Despereaux dropped his handkerchief and he backed away from the king. Rodents do not speak to princesses. We will not have this becoming a topsy-turvy, wrong-headed world. These are rules. Scat, get lost before my common sense returns and I have you killed. The king stamped his foot again, and Despereaux found it alarming to have such a big foot brought down with so much force and anger so close to his own small head. He ran towards the hole in the wall, but he turned before he entered it. He turned and shouted to the princess, My name is Despereaux. Despereaux, she said. I honor you, shouted Despereaux. I honor you was what the knight said to the fair maiden in the story that Despereaux read every day in the book in the library. Despereaux had muttered the phrase often to himself, but he had never before this evening had an occasion to use it, and when speaking to someone else. Get out of here, shouted the king, stamping his foot harder and then harder, still so it seemed as if the whole castle, the very world, were shaking. Rodents know nothing of honor. Despereaux ran into the hole, and from there he looked out at the princess. She had picked up his handkerchief, and she was looking at him, right directly into his soul. Despereaux, she said. He saw his name on her lips. I honor you, whispered Despereaux. I honor you. and he put his paw over his heart. He bowed so low that his whiskers touched the floor. He, alas, a mouse deeply in love. Chapter 8. To the Rats. The Mouse Council, 13 honored mice and one most very honored head mouse, heeded the call of Leicester's drum and gathered in a small secret hole off King Philip's throne room. The 14 mice sat around a piece of wood balanced on spools of thread and listened to the horror while Despereaux's father related the story of what Furlough had seen. "At the foot of a king," said Leicester. "Her right finger on top of his head," said Leicester. He was looking up at her, and not in fear. The Mouse Council members listened with their mouths opened. They listened with their whiskers drooping and their ears flat against their heads. They listened in dismay and outrage and fear. When Leicester finished, there was a sad silence. It was dismal and deep. Sorry, I lost my place. Something intoned the very most honored head mouse. "Something is wrong with your son. He is not well. This goes beyond his fevers, beyond his large ears, and his lack of growth. He is deeply disturbed. His behavior endangers us all. Humans cannot be trusted. We know this to be an indisputable fact. A mouse who consorts with humans, a mouse who would sit right at the foot of a man, a mouse who would allow a human to touch him." And here the entire Mouse Council indulged in a collective shiver of disgust. "Cannot be trusted. That is the way of the world, our world. Fellow mice, it is my most fervent hope that Despereaux has not spoken to these humans, but obviously we can assume nothing. And this is a time to act, not wonder." Leicester nodded his head in agreement, and the 12 other members of the Mouse Council nodded their heads too. "We have no choice," said the head mouse. "He must go to the dungeon." He pounded his fisted paw on the table. "He must go to the rats immediately. Members of this council, I will now ask you to vote. Those in favor of Despereaux being sent to the dungeon say aye." There was a chorus of sad ayes. "Those opposed say nay." Silence reigned in the room. The only noise came from Leicester, and he was crying. And 13 mice, ashamed for Leicester, looked away. Reader, can you imagine your own father not voting against your being sent to the dungeon full of rats? Can you imagine him not saying one word in your defense? Despereaux's father wept, and the most very honored hen mouse beat his paw against the table again and said, "Despereaux Tilling will appear before the mouse community. He will hear of his sins, and he will be given a chance to deny them. If he does not deny them, he will be allowed to renounce them so that he may go to the dungeon with a pure heart. Despereaux Tilling is hereby called to sit with the Mouse Council." At least Leicester had the decency to weep at his act of perfidy. Reader, do you know what perfidy means? I have a feeling you do, based on the little scene that has just unfolded here, but you should look up the word in the dictionary just to be sure. Chapter 9. The Right Question. The Mouse Council sent Furlough to collect Despereaux, and Furlough found his brother in the library standing on top of the great open book, his tail wrapped tightly around his feet, his small body shivering. Despereaux was reading the story out loud to himself. He was reading from the beginning so that he could get to the end, where the reader was assured that the knight and the fair maiden lived happily ever after. Despereaux wanted to read those words, happily ever after. He needed to say them aloud. He needed some assurance that this feeling he had for the Princess P, this love, would come to a good end. And so he was reading the story as if it were a spell, and the words of it spoken aloud could make magic happen. "See here," said Furlough out loud to himself. He looked at his brother and then looked away. "This is just the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of thing. What's he doing here? He's not eating the paper. He's talking to the paper. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong." "Hey," he said to Despereaux. Despereaux kept reading. "Hey," shouted Furlough. "Despereaux, the Mouse Council wants you." Pardon?" said Despereaux. He looked up from the book. "The Mouse Council has called you to sit with them." "Me?" said Despereaux. "You." "Oh, I'm busy right now," said Despereaux, and he bent his head again to the open book. Furlough sighed. "Geez, nothing makes sense to this guy. Nothing. I was right to turn him in. He's sick." Furlough crawled up the chair leg and then hopped onto the book. He sat next to Despereaux, and he tapped him on the head. Once, twice. Hey, he said, the Mouse Council isn't asking. They're telling. They're commanding. You have to come with me, right now. Despereaux turned to Furlough. Do you know what love is? He asked. Huh? Love. Furlough shook his head. You're asking the wrong question, he said. The question you should be asking is, why does the Mouse Council want to see me? There is somebody who loves me, said Despereaux, and I love her, and that is the only thing that matters to me. Somebody who loves you, somebody who you love, what difference does that make? What matters is that you are in a lot of trouble with the Mouse Council. Her name, said Despereaux, is P. What? The person who loves me. Her name is P. Oh, sighed Furlough, you're missing the whole point here. You're missing the point of being a mouse. You're missing the point of being called to sit with the Mouse Council. You have to come with me. It's the law. You've been called. Despereaux sighed. He reached out and touched the words, Fair Maiden, in the book. He traced them with one paw, and then he put his paw to his mouth. Oh, you're making a fool of yourself, said Furlough. Let's go. I honor you, whispered Despereaux. I honor you. And then, reader, he followed Furlough over the book and down the leg of the chair and across the library floor to the waiting Mouse Council. He allowed his brother to lead him to his fate. Chapter 10. This is our last one for today. Chapter 10. Good Reasons. The entire mouse community, as instructed by the most very honored head mouse, had gathered behind the wall of the castle ballroom. The members of the Mouse Council sat atop 3 bricks piled high, and spread out before them was every mouse, old and young, foolish and wise, who lived in the castle. They were all waiting for Despereaux. Make way, said Furlough. Here he is. I've got him. Make way. Furlough pushed through the crowd of mice. Despereaux clung to his brother's tail. There he is, the mice whispered. There he is. He's so small. Well, they say he was born with his eyes open. Some of the mice pulled away from Despereaux in disgust, and others, thrill-seekers, reached out to touch him with a whisker or a paw. The princess put a finger on him. They say he sat at the foot of the king. It is simply not done, came the distinctive voice of Despereaux's Aunt Florence. Make way, shouted Furlough. I have him right here. I have Despereaux Tilling, who has been called to sit with the Mouse Council. He led Despereaux to the front of the room. Honored members of the Mouse Council, shouted Furlough. I have brought you Despereaux Tilling, as you requested, to sit with you. He looked over his shoulder at Despereaux. Let go of me, Furlough said. Despereaux dropped Furlough's tail, and he looked up at the members of the Mouse Council. His father met his gaze, and then he shook his head and looked away. And Despereaux turned and faced the sea of mice. To the dungeon, a voice cried out. Straight to the dungeon with him. Despereaux's head, which had been full of such delightful phrases such as happily ever after and lovely ears and I honor you, suddenly cleared. Straight to the dungeon, another voice shouted. Enough, said the most very honored head mouse. This trial will be conducted in an orderly fashion. We will act civilized. He cleared his throat, and he said to Despereaux, Son, turn and look at me. Despereaux turned. He looked up into the head mouse's eyes. They were dark, deep, and sad and frightened. And looking into them, Despereaux's heart thuttered once, twice. Despereaux Tilling, said the head mouse. Yes, sir, said Despereaux. We, the 14 members of the Mouse Council, have discussed your behaviors. First, we will give you a chance to defend yourself against these rumors of your irregulous acts. Do you or did you not sit at the foot of the human king? Well, I did, said Despereaux, but I was listening to the music, sir. I was there to hear the song that the king was singing. To hear what? The song, sir. He was singing a song about the deep purple falling over sleepy garden walls. The head mouse shook his head. Well, whatever you're talking about is beside the point. The question is this, and only this. Did you sit at the foot of the human king? I did, sir. The community of mice shifted their tails and paws and whiskers, and they waited. And did you allow the girl human, the princess, to touch you? Her name is P. Well, never mind her name. Did you allow her to touch you? Yes, sir, said Despereaux. I let her touch me. It felt good. A gasp arose from the assembled mice. Despereaux heard his mother's voice. Mon Dieu, it is not the end of the world. It was a touch. What of it? It is simply not done, came Aunt Florence's voice from the crowd. To the dungeon, said a mouse in the front row. Silence, roared the most very honored head mouse. Silence. And he looked down at Despereaux. Do you, Despereaux Tilling, understand the sacred, never to be broken rules of conduct for being a mouse? Yes, sir, said Despereaux, I guess, but did you break them? Yes, sir, said Despereaux. He raised his voice, but I broke the rules for good reasons, because of music and because of love. Love, said the head mouse. Oh, said Furlough, here we go. I love her, sir, said Despereaux. Well, we are not here to talk about love. This trial is not about love. This trial is about you being a mouse, shouted the most very honored head mouse. And you are not acting like one. Yes, sir, said Despereaux, I know. No, I don't think you do know. And because you do not deny the charges, you must be punished. You are being sent, as an ancient castle mouse law decrees, to the dungeon. You are being sent to the rats. That's right, shouted a mouse in the crowd. That's the ticket. The dungeon, the rats. Despereaux's small heart sank all the way to the tip of his tail. There would be no light in the dungeon, no stained glass windows, no library, no books. And there would be no Princess P. But first, said the most very honored head mouse, we will give you the chance to renounce your actions. We will allow you to go to the dungeon with a pure heart. Renounce? Repent. Say that you're sorry for you sitting at the foot of the king. Say that you're sorry you allowed a human princess to touch you. Say that you regret these actions. Despereaux felt hot and then cold and then hot again. Renounce her? Renounce the princess? Mon joy, shouted his mother. Son, do not act a fool. Renounce, repent. What do you say, Despereaux Tilling? I say, no, whispered Despereaux. What? Said the head mouse. No, said Despereaux, and this time he did not whisper the words. I am not sorry. I will not renounce my actions. I love her. I love the princess. There was a bellow of collective outrage. The whole of the mouse community surged towards Despereaux. The mice seemed to become one angry body, with hundreds of tails and thousands of whiskers, and one huge, hungry mouth, opening and closing and opening and closing, and saying over and over and over again, to the dungeon, to the dungeon, to the dungeon. The words pounded through Despereaux's body with each beat of his heart. Very well, said the most very honored head mouse. You will die then, with a black heart. Threadmaster, he called, bring out the thread. Despereaux marveled at his own bravery. He admired his own defiance. And then, reader, he fainted. And that is where we stop. So once again, there are some French words in here since his mother is French and I do not speak French, so I'm sure I butchered all of them. So bear with me there. I am not going to be giving us all French lessons. Okay, so answer Wanna Be Wednesday and tell me what it is you want to be when you grow up. And I will see you tomorrow, starting with chapter 11. Bye.